doctor collapses seeing the bracelet on the janitor man she loved a decade ago more. The morning sun painted the Atlantic Ocean in shades of amber and rose as Celeste Davenport stood on the balcony of the Hotel Mel Brock's penthouse suite, watching the waves crash against the Miami shoreline. At 24, she owned this entire building, 37 floors of luxury, elegance, and the weight of her late father's empire pressing down on her shoulders like an invisible crown she never wanted to wear. She took a sip of her black coffee, barely tasting it. The bitterness matched her mood perfectly. "Miss Davenport?" Her assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "The maintenance supervisor needs to speak with you about the staffing changes." Celeste closed her eyes briefly. Another problem. Another decision. Another day of pretending she had everything under control when, in reality, she felt like she was drowning in a sea of spreadsheets, shareholder meetings, and the suffocating loneliness of her father's mansion where she lived alone, rattling around in rooms too big for one person. "Send him up," she said, her voice cool and professional, the voice she'd perfected over the past 3 years since inheriting this hotel at 21, since her disastrous marriage and subsequent divorce at 23, since she'd learned that money could buy everything except genuine human connection. She turned back to the ocean, her royal blue blazer catching the morning light, her denim shorts and designer blue heels a carefully curated image of casual authority, her blonde hair, sun-lightened and falling in waves past her shoulders, lifted slightly in the ocean breeze. She looked every inch the successful young billionaire. She felt every inch the fraud. The elevator chimed softly behind her. "Miss Davenport, I apologize for the early interruption," the supervisor began, his voice carrying that particular tone of someone about to deliver news they knew wouldn't be well received. "We've had 3 maintenance staff members quit this week. The workload is becoming unsustainable for the remaining team." Celeste turned, her blue eyes sharp despite her inner turmoil. 3? In 1 week? "Yes, ma'am. 2 found higher-paying positions at the new resort on South Beach, and 1 moved out of state. I've been conducting interviews and I have several candidates, but I wanted to run the final selections by you. Your father always insisted on personally approving anyone who would have access to the executive floors." A pang of grief struck her chest, unexpected and sharp even after 3 years. Her father, Marcus Davenport, had built this hotel from nothing, had taught her everything about running it, and had died suddenly of a heart attack before she'd felt ready to take over, before she'd had the chance to ask him why he'd done what he did 10 years ago, before she could demand answers about Ryan. She pushed the thought away violently. She didn't think about Ryan Walker anymore. That was over. Done. A childhood romance that her father had been right to end, even if his methods had been cruel. "Show me their files," she said curtly. The supervisor laid 3 folders on the glass conference table. Celeste picked up the first one, scanning the credentials of a 48-year-old man with 20 years of experience at various hotels. Solid. Reliable. She approved him with a nod. The second candidate was a woman in her 30s, recently relocated from New York with impressive references. Another nod. The third folder felt heavier somehow, though that was impossible. Celeste opened it and froze. The name on the application was Ryan Walker. Her hand trembled slightly before she forced it to still. It couldn't be. Ryan Walker was a common enough name. There had to be thousands of them in Florida alone. This was just a coincidence, a cruel trick of fate that meant nothing. But then she saw the date of birth, 28 years old, the exact age her Ryan would be now. The photograph was professional, required for all employment applications, and showed a man in his late 20s with dark hair, strong features, and eyes that, even in a static image, carried a depth of experience that made her breath catch. He looked nothing like the gangly 16-year-old boy she'd known, the one who'd ridden that ridiculous blue Harley-Davidson motorcycle he'd rebuilt from scrap parts, the one who'd made her laugh until her sides hurt, the one who'd looked at her like she was the entire universe condensed into one person. And yet, something about the set of his jaw, the intensity of his gaze, the way he held himself even in a photograph, it was him. She knew it with a certainty that bypassed logic and went straight to the marrow of her bones. "This one," the supervisor said, clearly misinterpreting her silence as consideration. He's technically overqualified for the position. Has an associate degree in mechanical engineering, but he specified he needed flexible hours due to childcare responsibilities. Single father. The interview was impressive. He's clearly intelligent and articulate. I think he'd be an excellent addition to the team, though I'll admit I was surprised someone with his background was applying for maintenance work. Childcare responsibilities. Single father. The words echoed in Celeste's head. Ryan had a child. Of course he did. 10 years was a lifetime. He'd moved on, built a life, had a family. Why shouldn't he? She'd gotten married and divorced in that time. Why was her chest tightening like someone was crushing her rib cage? Miss Davenport, should I schedule him for a second interview with you? She should say no. She should reject this application and never think about it again. Seeing Ryan Walker would accomplish nothing except reopening wounds she'd spent a decade trying to heal. She'd moved on. He'd moved on. The past was the past. When can he start? The words came out of her mouth before her brain could stop them. The supervisor looked pleased. He indicated he could begin immediately. He's actually here today. I asked the top candidates to come in for a working interview, see how they handle the actual environment. He's down on the 3rd floor right now, shadowing Marcus. Fine. Have him report to the executive floor starting Monday. I want all new hires on the executive team to understand the standards expected throughout the entire hotel. This was a lie. She never personally supervised new maintenance workers, but she needed to see him, needed to confirm whether this really was her Ryan, or just a ghost her lonely heart had conjured from a coincidental name and birthday. Of course, Miss Davenport, I'll inform him immediately. After the supervisor left, Celeste stood motionless in her penthouse office, staring at the photograph in the file. 10 years ago, her father had sat her down in this very room, though it had been his office then, and told her that Ryan Walker had taken money to leave town, that he'd never loved her, that he'd seen an opportunity to cash in on a rich girl's infatuation, and had grabbed it with both hands. Her father had shown her a bank statement, a signed document, proof that Ryan had accepted $50,000 to disappear from her life. She'd been 14 years old, heartbroken and humiliated. She'd believed her father because why wouldn't she? Marcus Davenport had never lied to her about anything else. And Ryan had vanished without a word, which seemed to confirm everything. For years she'd hated Ryan Walker. Then she'd pitied him. Then she'd convinced herself she'd forgotten him entirely. But seeing his face again, even in a photograph, brought it all crashing back. The summer days at the beach, the hours spent in his tiny garage while he worked on that Harley with grease-stained hands and infinite patience, explaining mechanical principles to her like she was his equal, not some rich girl slumming it with the poor kid from the wrong side of town. The way he'd looked at her, the way he'd made her feel seen in a way no one else ever had, before or since. The bracelet she'd made for him in art class, braiding leather strips in blue and white, the colors of the ocean they both loved. She'd fastened it around his wrist herself, her fingers clumsy with nervousness, and he'd sworn he'd never take it off. Lies. All of it lies. He'd taken her father's money and run. So why was he back? And why was he applying to clean floors in her hotel when he had an engineering degree? Celeste made a decision that she knew was probably stupid, definitely unprofessional, and completely unlike her usual controlled demeanor. She was going to go down to the 3rd floor and see this Ryan Walker for herself, right now, before she could talk herself out of it. She took the executive elevator down, her heart pounding in a way that felt ridiculous for a woman who regularly negotiated multi-million-dollar deals without breaking a sweat. The 3rd floor was currently undergoing renovation on the west wing, which meant it would be relatively empty of guests. She could observe without making a scene. The elevator doors opened to the familiar smell of fresh paint and new carpet. Celeste stepped out, her heels clicking softly on the marble floor of the East Wing corridor. She heard voices from around the corner, the maintenance supervisor's distinctive baritone and another voice, deeper, measured, with a quality that made something in her chest constrict painfully. She moved closer, staying just out of sight. Impressive work ethic, the supervisor was saying. The attention to detail is exactly what we need on the executive floors. Miss Davenport personally approved your hiring, which almost never happens with maintenance positions. You must have made quite an impression. I appreciate the opportunity, the other voice replied, and Celeste's knees went weak. It was him. Older, deeper, but unmistakably him. I need the flexibility this position offers. My daughter, she's 7, and the previous job didn't accommodate school schedules well. Understood. Family comes first. That's actually something Miss Davenport values highly, despite what some people assume about her. She's fair, demands excellence, but she understands that her staff have lives outside these walls. A pause. Then Ryan's voice. Careful, neutral. I've heard she inherited the hotel quite young. That must have been difficult. 3 years ago, when she was just 21, her father's death was sudden. Massive heart attack in his office upstairs. She found him. The supervisor's voice dropped. Between you and me, I think she's been running on pure determination ever since. She works harder than anyone in this building. But there's something sad about her. Like she's built walls so high nobody can get in. Celeste pressed her hand against the wall, steadying herself. She hadn't known that people saw that in her. She thought she was doing a better job of hiding it. Anyway, the supervisor continued, let me show you the supply closets on this floor, and then we'll head up to Miss Davenport. Celeste had stepped around the corner without consciously deciding to do so. Her eyes went immediately to the man in the blue uniform, and for a moment, the entire world reduced to just the two of them, standing 15 feet apart in a hotel corridor, 10 years and a lifetime of secrets between them. He'd grown into his features. The boyish lankiness had filled out into solid muscle, earned through physical work rather than gym memberships. His dark hair was shorter than she remembered. Professional, but still with that slight wave that used to fall across his forehead. His face had matured, gained character lines around his eyes and mouth, but those eyes, dark brown, intense, intelligent, were exactly as she remembered. And on his wrist, visible because he'd pushed up his sleeve while working, was a faded leather bracelet in blue and white, so worn it should have fallen apart years ago, but clearly carefully maintained, the ends reknotted multiple times to keep it intact. The bracelet she'd made him when she was 14 years old. The bracelet he'd supposedly discarded along with his memories of her when he took her father's money. Celeste couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't reconcile what she was seeing with what she'd believed for 10 years. Ryan's face had gone completely still, but his eyes were a storm of emotions she couldn't begin to name. Recognition, shock, pain, and something else. Something that looked almost like longing before he shuddered it away. Miss Davenport, the supervisor said, clearly confused by the tension suddenly crackling in the air. I wasn't expecting you down here. Is everything all right? She forced words past her frozen throat. I wanted to personally welcome our new team member. Mr. Walker, is it? Yes, ma'am. His voice was steady, professional, but she heard the slight rasp in it, the only sign that he was affected at all. Thank you for the opportunity. Ma'am. He was calling her ma'am like she was just his boss, like they were strangers. Maybe they were. Maybe the boy she'd known had died the same day he'd taken that money. Maybe this was just a man who happened to share a name and a face with a ghost. But then why was he still wearing her bracelet? You have experience in mechanical engineering, I understand, she heard herself say, her voice cool and businesslike, the armor she wore so well snapping into place. That's an unusual background for someone applying for a maintenance position. Something flickered in his eyes, a challenge maybe, or defiance. I like working with my hands, Miss Davenport. I find more satisfaction in fixing real problems than in theoretical ones. And as I mentioned in my interview, I need flexible hours to be present for my daughter. Admirable, she said, and meant it, even as another piece of her heart cracked at the reminder that he had a child, a life, a whole existence she knew nothing about. Family should always come first. I've always believed that, he said quietly, and there was something in his tone, an edge, a bitterness perhaps, that made her wonder if there was a double meaning she wasn't catching. The supervisor, clearly sensing something off but too professional to comment, cleared his throat. Miss Davenport, was there something specific you needed, or should we continue with the orientation? Actually, Celeste said, making another impulsive decision in a morning full of them, I'd like Mr. Walker to report directly to me for his first week. I want to ensure he understands the standards expected on the executive floors. The supervisor's eyebrows rose slightly. This was definitely not standard procedure, but he nodded. Of course, Miss Davenport. Mr. Walker, you'll report to the penthouse level at 7 a.m. Monday morning. Ryan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but he nodded. Understood. Celeste turned on her heel and walked away before she could do something stupid like ask about the bracelet, or demand to know why he'd come back, or, worst of all, tell him that she'd never really stopped missing him. Not in 10 years, not through her marriage, not through any of it. Back in the elevator alone, she braced herself against the wall and closed her eyes. This was insane. She was his employer. He was clearly not interested in anything beyond professional courtesy. And even if he was, what good could possibly come from dredging up the past? She thought about the bracelet, the worn, maintained, still on his wrist after a decade. That wasn't nothing. That had to mean something. Or maybe it didn't. Maybe she was reading significance into something that was just habit, just a piece of jewelry he'd gotten used to wearing and never bothered to remove. By Monday morning, Celeste had convinced herself that she was being ridiculous. She'd spent the entire weekend in her mansion, swimming laps in her pool, trying to exhaust herself into not thinking about Ryan Walker. It hadn't worked. She'd barely slept, and when she did, she dreamed of summers long past, of a blue Harley motorcycle, of a boy's hands covered in grease as he explained compression ratios and spark plug gaps with the enthusiasm of someone sharing sacred knowledge. She arrived at the hotel at 6:30 earlier than usual and spent half an hour obsessively reviewing her appearance in the bathroom mirror. The royal blue blazer, the denim shorts, the heels, her armor, her uniform, her way of telling the world she was in control. She looked like a successful CEO. She felt like a nervous teenager. At precisely 7 a.m., the elevator chimed and Ryan Walker stepped into her office. He'd clearly put effort into his appearance. The blue maintenance uniform was crisp, perfectly pressed, the yellow work gloves tucked into his belt. He looked professional, competent, and completely ill at ease in the opulent surroundings of her penthouse office. Mr. Walker, she greeted him, keeping her voice neutral. Thank you for your punctuality. Miss Davenport, he replied, equally formal. This was unbearable. They were going to dance around each other like strangers, pretending they didn't have history, pretending that bracelet on his wrist didn't exist. Fine. If he wanted to play it that way, she could too. She was good at pretending. She'd been doing it for years. I'll be showing you the maintenance requirements for the executive floors personally, she said. The standards here are significantly higher than in the public areas. Every detail matters. Are you familiar with luxury hospitality maintenance protocols? I've reviewed the hotel's standards manual, he said. I'm confident I can meet expectations. He was so controlled, so distant, it made her want to scream. Instead, she led him through the penthouse, pointing out the custom woodwork that required special cleaning products, the imported marble that couldn't tolerate standard floor cleaners, the antique fixtures that needed gentle handling. He listened attentively, asked intelligent questions, took notes on a small pad he pulled from his pocket. They were in the library when it happened, when the careful professionalism cracked. Celeste was explaining the care required for the first edition books her father had collected, running her finger along a leather spine, when she turned and found Ryan standing at the window, staring out at the ocean with an expression of such profound sadness that it stopped her mid-sentence. Ryan? His name escaped before she could stop it. Not Mr. Walker. Ryan. He turned, and for just a second his mask slipped. She saw everything. The grief, the longing, the confusion, the anger. Then it was gone, replaced by careful neutrality. I apologized, Miss Davenport. The view reminded me of something. Of what? She moved closer, unable to help herself. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, of a time when things were simpler, before life got complicated, before you took my father's money and disappeared. The words came out sharper than she intended, driven by 10 years of hurt. His head snapped toward her, shock written plainly across his face. "What? Don't," she said, and hated how her voice shook. "Don't pretend you don't know what I'm talking about. My father told me everything. $50,000 to get out of my life. You took it and ran, and you didn't even have the decency to say goodbye." Ryan stared at her like she'd spoken in a foreign language. Then, slowly, deliberately, he pulled off his work glove and held up his wrist, the faded bracelet stark against his tanned skin. "Does this," he said, his voice rough with barely contained emotion, "look like something I discarded? I have worn this bracelet every single day for 10 years, Celeste. Every single day. I've reknotted it 17 times to keep it intact. I've refused to take it off even when it was professionally inadvisable, because it's the only thing I have left of the best summer of my life, of the only person who ever saw me as more than just the poor kid with the broken-down motorcycle." She was shaking her head, backing away. No, you're lying. My father showed me the bank records. He showed me your signature." "I don't know what your father showed you," Ryan interrupted, "but I never took a dime from him. What I did take was a 6 a.m. bus out of town after he threatened to have my mother arrested for fraud if I didn't leave Miami immediately, and never contact you again." The words hit Celeste like physical blows. "What?" "Your father cornered me in the parking lot of my mother's apartment building," Ryan continued, and now that he'd started talking, the words seemed to pour out like a dam breaking. "It was August 15th, 3 days after your 14th birthday. He told me he knew I'd been seeing you, that he'd been watching us. He said I was a bad influence, that I was going to ruin your life, that you deserved better than a future with some grease monkey who would never amount to anything." Celeste sank into the nearest chair, her legs refusing to support her. "I told him I loved you," Ryan said, and his voice cracked on the word. "I was 16 years old, and I told a billionaire to his face that I loved his daughter and I wasn't going to leave her. Do you know what he said?" She shook her head mutely. "He said that was exactly what he'd expected, that I was clearly willing to say anything to maintain access to your family's wealth. Then he told me about the fraud charges he could fabricate against my mother, the evidence he could manufacture, the way he could destroy her entire life with a single phone call. My mother, who cleaned houses 16 hours a day to keep a roof over our heads after my father died. He was very specific about how easily he could make her lose everything." "No," Celeste whispered. "He wouldn't. He gave me 2 hours to pack and leave town. Said if I ever contacted you, if I ever tried to come back, if I even sent you a letter, he'd follow through on his threat. What was I supposed to do, Celeste? I was 16. I had no money, no power, no way to fight him. So I got on a bus, and I left, and it killed something inside me. But I kept your bracelet. I kept it because it was all I had left of you." The room was spinning. Celeste pressed her hands against her temples, trying to process this, trying to reconcile this version of events with everything she'd believed for a decade. "The bank records," she managed. "He showed me. I don't know what he showed you, but it was a lie. I never took money from your father. I would have starved before I took his money." She believed him. God help her. She believed him, because the raw pain in his voice, the way his hands were shaking slightly, the bracelet that he'd worn every day for 10 years, those weren't things you could fake. Which meant her father, her beloved father, the man she'd idolized, had lied to her, had fabricated evidence, had threatened a 16-year-old boy and his mother, had destroyed both their lives to keep them apart. "I don't understand," she said, her voice barely audible. "Why? Why would he do that? Would he?" Ryan laughed, but it was a bitter sound devoid of humor. "You were 14, Celeste, the daughter of a billionaire. I was 16, the son of a housekeeper. In what world was your father ever going to approve of that relationship? But we were kids. We weren't just anything," Ryan said quietly. "At least, not to me. You were everything to me. And I think your father saw that, and it terrified him. He wanted to end it before it became something he couldn't control." Celeste stood on shaky legs and walked to the window, wrapping her arms around herself. Below, the Atlantic stretched out endlessly, indifferent to human suffering, just as it had been 10 years ago when two teenagers had been forcibly separated. "I hated you," she said softly. "For years. I hated you. I thought you'd used me, that I'd been stupid and naive and you'd seen an opportunity to cash in. I know. That's what he wanted you to think. She turned to look at him. He was still standing by the bookshelf, maintaining professional distance, but his eyes were full of a decade's worth of grief. Why did you come back? She asked. Why apply to work here, of all places? He was quiet for so long she didn't think he was going to answer. Then, I didn't know you owned this hotel. I've been living in Tampa for the last 8 years. I moved back to Miami 6 months ago because my daughter's mother, my ex-wife, died, and her parents are here. They want to be part of Hannah's life, and I couldn't deny them that. I needed a job with flexible hours, and this position was available. I saw the name Mel Brook, but I didn't make the connection to your family until I walked in for the interview and saw your father's portrait in the lobby. He paused, his jaw working. By then, it was too late to back out without making a scene. And part of me, he broke off, shaking his head. Part of you what? Part of me wanted to see you again, he admitted. Even knowing it would hurt. Even knowing you probably hated me. I wanted to see if you were happy. If your father's plan had worked out. If you'd gotten the life he thought you deserved. Happy? Celeste laughed, and it came out harsh and broken. I've been married and divorced. I live alone in a mansion that feels like a mausoleum. I run a business I never wanted, trying to live up to the memory of a man who apparently lied to me about one of the most important things in my life. Does that sound happy to you? The silence that followed was heavy with everything they weren't saying. Finally, Ryan cleared his throat. I should get back to work. I'm sure you have more important things to do than supervise me cleaning windows. Ryan, wait, Miss Davenport, he corrected, gentle but firm. I'm your employee. That's all this can be. Your father made sure of that 10 years ago, and the fact that he's gone doesn't change anything. You're still the billionaire CEO, and I'm still the janitor with the kid to support. Some gaps are too wide to bridge. That's not true, isn't it? He looked at her steadily. What exactly are you proposing, Celeste? That we try to pick up where we left off when we were kids? We're different people now. We've lived entire lives apart. I've been married, had a child, been widowed. You've built an empire. We're strangers who happen to share some history. You're still wearing my bracelet, she pointed out, desperate to break through his walls. I never said I didn't care, he replied quietly. I said it can't work. Those are different things. He put his work glove back on and picked up his cleaning supplies. If you'll excuse me, I have windows to clean. Unless you'd prefer to assign me to a different floor, I'd understand if my presence here is uncomfortable. No, she said quickly. Too quickly. No, I want you here. I need time to process this, to figure out what it means, but I don't want you to leave. Something flickered in his expression. Hope, maybe, or pain. Okay, then I'll be in the conference room if you need me. He walked out, leaving Celeste standing alone in the library, her entire understanding of her past crumbling around her like sand. Over the following days, a strange routine developed. Ryan reported to the penthouse each morning at 7, maintained a scrupulously professional demeanor, and did his job with quiet competence. Celeste tried to focus on her actual work but found herself constantly aware of his presence, the sound of his footsteps in the hallway, the faint scent of industrial cleaner, the occasional glimpse of him through her office window as he worked. They barely spoke beyond what was necessary for work. It was torture. By Thursday, Celeste couldn't take it anymore. She found Ryan in the break room on the executive floor eating his lunch, a simple sandwich he'd clearly made himself. He looked up when she entered, surprise flickering across his face. Miss Davenport, is there something you need? Stop calling me that, she said, closing the door behind her. When it's just us, please, just stop. He set down his sandwich slowly. Celeste, what are we doing here? I don't know, she admitted. I just know that I can't keep pretending you're just another employee. Not after what you told me. She broke off, frustrated. I need to understand. I need to know what really happened, all of it. Ryan sighed, running a hand through his hair in a gesture so familiar it made her chest ache. What's there to understand? Your father wanted me gone. He made it happen. End of story. It's not the end, though, is it? You came back, and I'm still here, and we're both clearly not over it. Speak for yourself, he said, but his eyes betrayed him. Celeste sat down across from him uninvited. Tell me about your daughter. Tell me about your life. Please. I want to know who you became after everything. He studied her for a long moment, as if trying to determine whether this was wise. Then slowly he began to talk. Her name is Hannah. She's 7 years old, smart as hell, and asks more questions than any human being should be capable of formulating. She loves science experiments, hates Brussels sprouts, and thinks my Harley is the coolest thing in the universe. Despite everything, Celeste smiled. You still have the motorcycle? Same one I rebuilt when I was 15. I've maintained it obsessively. It's not worth much monetarily, but He paused. It's the only thing from back then that I could keep. Besides the bracelet. Tell me about her mother. His expression shuddered slightly. Jessica. We met in Tampa when I was 20. She was kind, patient with my baggage. We got married too fast, had Hannah, and realized within a year that we'd made a mistake. We loved each other, but we weren't in love. Does that make sense? Celeste nodded, thinking of her own failed marriage. We divorced amicably when Hannah was 3, Ryan continued. Stayed friends, co-parented well. Then she was diagnosed with ovarian cancer last year. She fought hard, but it was aggressive. She died 4 months ago. I'm so sorry, Celeste said, and meant it with her whole heart. Hannah took it hard. That's part of why I moved back here. Her maternal grandparents wanted to be involved, and I thought the support system would help. But she still has nightmares. Still asks when mommy's coming home even though she knows the answer. That must be devastating for you. It is what it is. You do what you have to do for your kid. He met her eyes. Your turn. Tell me about your life. So she did. She told him about inheriting the hotel too young, about the pressure, about the marriage to a man her father had approved of, a merger of families as much as a union of hearts, about the loneliness of her divorce, the realization that she'd married someone who loved her money more than her, about living in her father's shadow even after his death. I found him, you know, she said quietly. My father, in his office. He was working late, as always. I came to bring him dinner and he was just slumped over his desk. The doctors said it was instantaneous, that he didn't suffer. But I keep thinking about the last conversation we had. We'd argued about a business decision. The last thing I said to him was that he needed to trust me to run things my way. And then he was gone. Celeste. Ryan's hand moved across the table, stopping just short of touching hers. That's not your fault. I know. Rationally, I know that. But it doesn't make it easier. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their separate griefs settling around them. What do we do now? Celeste finally asked. Ryan pulled his hand back, breaking the almost connection. I don't know. Part of me wants to say we should try again, see if there's anything left of what we had. But the other part, the part that's been burned before, says this is a terrible idea that will end badly for everyone, especially Hannah. I can't put her through any more upheaval. I understand, Celeste said, even though it felt like he was crushing something fragile in her chest. But, Ryan continued, and her heart leaped at the word, maybe we could try being friends first? Real friends, not this weird professional dance we've been doing. Get to know who we are now instead of who we were. No expectations, no pressure, just see what happens. It wasn't what she wanted, but it was something. And right now, something was more than she'd had in 10 years. Friends, she agreed. I'd like that. His smile was small but genuine, and it transformed his entire face, giving her a glimpse of the boy she'd known beneath the man he'd become. Hello, my friend, he said softly, and the words felt like a promise. How was your day today? Is everything okay? The question was so simple, so normal, but it meant everything, because it had been years, maybe since Ryan himself, back when they were kids, since anyone had asked her that question and genuinely cared about the answer. It's better now, she admitted. Much better. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Celeste Davenport smiled and meant it. Over the next few weeks, something tentative and precious began to grow between them. They established a routine. Ryan would arrive early, before his shift officially started, and they'd have coffee together in her office. They talk about everything and nothing. Books, philosophy, Hannah's latest questions about how the universe worked, the challenges of running a hotel, Ryan's mechanical projects. Celeste found herself looking forward to those morning conversations more than anything else in her day. Ryan was everything she remembered and more. Intelligent, thoughtful, with a way of seeing the world that challenged her assumptions. He recommended books she'd never have picked up on her own, debated her on everything from economic policy to whether the ocean had a sound or if it was just the wind, made her laugh with stories about Hannah's determination to understand quantum physics at age 7. And slowly, carefully, she began to understand the man he'd become. The grief he carried from Jessica's death, worn quietly but present in the way he sometimes stared out at the ocean with distant eyes. The fierce protectiveness he felt for his daughter, the way his entire face softened when he talked about her. The quiet dignity with which he approached his work, never apologizing for being a janitor but also never pretending it was what he'd dreamed of doing with his engineering degree. "Why maintenance?" she asked him one morning, about 3 weeks into their tentative friendship. "You have the education and skills to do more, forgive me, lucrative work." Ryan considered the question while sipping his coffee. "I like fixing things. There's something satisfying about taking something broken and making it work again. Plus, the flexible hours matter more than the prestige. I need to be able to pick Hannah up from school, help with homework, make dinner. A 9-to-5 engineering job wouldn't allow that." "You're a good father," Celeste observed. "I try. I fail regularly, but I try." He paused. "What about you? Did you ever want kids?" The question caught her off guard. "I don't know. Maybe. I thought I did when I got married, but Marcus, my ex-husband, was always putting it off. Work first, family later. And then there was no marriage to have a family in." "There's still time," Ryan said gently. "Is there? I'm 24, running a company that demands 18-hour days, single, and generally terrified of trusting anyone enough to let them that close again. So we're both broken in our own ways. I guess we are. Maybe that's okay," Ryan said. "Maybe being broken isn't the worst thing. Maybe it just means we've lived. We've survived. We've learned what matters." It was this quality in him, this ability to find philosophy in pain, meaning in struggle, that Celeste had fallen for when she was 14 and was falling for again now. Ryan Walker didn't just exist. He thought about existence, questioned it, tried to understand it. In a world of people who skated along surfaces, he dove deep. By the end of the first month, Celeste realized she was in trouble. What had started as friendship was becoming something more, at least on her side. She found herself watching Ryan as he worked, admiring the economy of his movements, the competence with which he handled even mundane tasks. She caught herself thinking about him at odd moments, wondering what he was doing, what Hannah had asked him that day, whether he thought about her outside their morning conversations. She was falling for him again, or maybe she'd never stopped. The realization terrified her. One evening, on impulse, she invited him to stay late after his shift ended. "I want to show you something," she said. He looked uncertain. "Celeste, I need to pick up Hannah. Call her grandparents, ask if they can watch her for a few extra hours, please. This is important." He studied her face, then nodded slowly and made the call. Hannah's grandparents apparently were happy to help. Celeste led him up to the roof, a space that wasn't technically accessible to anyone, but she had the master keys. The sun was setting, painting the sky in impossible colors, and the ocean stretched out before them like liquid gold. "I used to come up here with my father," she said, "when I was little, before things got complicated. He'd bring me up here on summer evenings, and we'd watch the sunset, and he'd tell me about his dreams for the hotel, for the business, for my future." Ryan stood beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, far enough that they weren't touching. "It's beautiful. I haven't been up here since he died," she admitted. "I couldn't face it, but tonight I wanted to share it with someone, with you." He turned to look at her, and the expression on his face made her breath catch. "Celeste, I know we said friends," she interrupted. "I know it's complicated, but I need you to know that these past few weeks have meant more to me than anything has in years. You make me feel like myself again, like the girl I was before I learned to hide behind blazers and board meetings. You make me feel like that too, Ryan admitted quietly. Like the person I was before life taught me that hoping for things was dangerous. They stood there as the sun sank lower, balanced on the knife's edge between friendship and something more, both afraid to push forward, neither willing to pull back. My father was wrong, Celeste said finally. About you. About us. About everything. Maybe. Or maybe he was right that we were too young, that the timing was wrong, that there were too many obstacles. Ryan paused. But we're not kids anymore. And the obstacles? They're different now, but they're still there. I'm your employee, Celeste. You're my boss. That's a power dynamic that... Then I'll fire you, she said impulsively. He laughed, startled. You can't fire me every time things get complicated. Watch me. And then what? How do I support Hannah? How do I pay rent? She deflated slightly. He was right. It wasn't that simple. I don't have answers, she admitted. I just know that walking away from this, from you again, would be the biggest mistake of my life. I did it once because I believed my father's lies. I won't do it again. Ryan reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and tucked a strand of blonde hair behind her ear. The gesture was so tender it made her eyes sting. I'm scared, he said simply. I'm terrified of messing this up, of hurting Hannah by getting involved with someone and having it fall apart, of letting myself hope for something that might not work out. I've been burned before, Celeste. We both have. So we're careful, she said. We go slow. We don't make promises we can't keep. But we give this a chance. Don't you think we owe ourselves that? After 10 years of believing lies, of thinking it was over, of grieving what we lost, don't we deserve to at least try? He was quiet for a long time, his hand still resting against her cheek, his eyes searching hers. Then, finally, he nodded. Slow, he said. Really slow. And you have to meet Hannah before this goes any further. She's part of my life, and if you can't handle that, I want to meet her, Celeste said. I want to know the person who's so important to you. Okay. He smiled, small but real. Okay. Then let's try. God help us both, but let's try. And standing there on the roof of the Hotel Melbrook with the Atlantic Ocean spread before them, and the sunset painting the world in gold and rose, Celeste Davenport let herself hope for the first time in a decade. The next Saturday, Ryan brought Hannah to meet Celeste at a neutral location, a cafe near the beach, casual and comfortable. Celeste arrived early, ridiculously nervous, changing outfits 3 times before settling on jeans and a simple blue top, trying to strike a balance between approachable and put together. When Ryan walked in with his daughter, Celeste's heart clenched. Hannah was small for 7, all blonde hair and inquisitive blue eyes, wearing a yellow sundress and white sneakers. She looked around the cafe with undisguised curiosity, then zeroed in on Celeste with an intensity that was almost alarming. You're Celeste, Hannah announced. Dad says you own a huge hotel and like philosophy and used to know him when he was young. Celeste blinked, then laughed. That's accurate. And you must be Hannah. Hannah Bell Walker, the girl corrected seriously. Bell was my mom's middle name. She died. I know, I'm very sorry. Hannah considered this. Thank you. Everyone says they're sorry, but most of them didn't even know her, so I don't know if they really mean it. Did you mean it? Celeste met those unnervingly direct blue eyes. Yes, because losing your mother must be the hardest thing you've ever experienced. And I'm sorry you have to go through that. Hannah nodded, apparently satisfied. Okay. Can I have hot chocolate? Ryan, who had been watching this exchange with barely concealed anxiety, relaxed slightly. Sure, sweetheart. Celeste, what would you like? They ordered drinks and settled into a booth. Hannah immediately launched into a series of questions that ranged from, why is the ocean salty? To, do you believe in parallel universes? To, what's your favorite dinosaur? Celeste found herself charmed despite her nervousness, drawn into conversations that veered from science to philosophy, to whether chocolate chip or oatmeal raisin cookies were superior. Dad makes the best cookies, Hannah informed her. He learned from his mom. That's my grandma Sarah, she lives in Georgia now. And he always makes them on Sundays. Do you like cookies? I do, Celeste said, though I haven't had homemade cookies in years. Hannah looked scandalized. Dad, you have to make cookies for Celeste. Store cookies don't count. Ryan smiled. Maybe I will. As the afternoon wore on, Celeste watched Ryan with his daughter and saw depths of tenderness she'd only glimpsed before. The way he listened to Hannah's elaborate theories about everything from why the sky was blue to whether dinosaurs would have liked pizza, the gentle way he corrected her when she was factually wrong without making her feel stupid, the obvious pride in his eyes when she articulated something particularly clever. This was what her father had tried to prevent. This man, this capacity for love and patience and intelligence. Her father had looked at 16-year-old Ryan and seen only poverty and threat, had been completely blind to the quality of character that was so evident now, and she'd believed him. For 10 years she'd believed her father's assessment instead of trusting her own judgment. Never again, she promised herself. After Hannah had been plied with enough hot chocolate to fuel a small rocket, Ryan suggested a walk on the beach. They strolled along the shoreline, Hannah running ahead to examine shells and interesting pieces of driftwood, while Ryan and Celeste followed at a more sedate pace. She's wonderful, Celeste said. Exhausting probably, but wonderful. Ryan laughed. That's accurate. She's been like that since she could talk, just endlessly curious about everything. Jessica used to joke that we should have named her Pandora because she's always opening boxes of questions. She's lucky to have you as a father. I'm lucky to have her. She's kept me sane through everything, grief, divorce, moving, all of it. Having to be strong for her meant I couldn't fall apart completely. Hannah came running back, holding something in her cupped hands. Look, a sand dollar, and it's whole. They're usually broken. She showed it to Celeste with obvious excitement. Celeste admired it appropriately, earning an approving nod. You can keep it if you want, Hannah offered. For good luck. That's very generous, Celeste said, genuinely touched. Are you sure? Yeah. Dad says you're important to him, so that makes you important to me too. Out of the mouths of babes. Celeste glanced at Ryan, who had turned slightly pink. Well, then I'll treasure it, she told Hannah seriously. Thank you. Later, after they'd said goodbye and Ryan and Hannah had driven away on that legendary blue Harley, Hannah wearing a tiny helmet and grinning with pure joy, Celeste sat in her car holding the sand dollar and thinking about what she'd just witnessed. This was what she wanted. Not just Ryan, but this. Family connection. Someone to share the small moments with. Someone whose kid brought her sand dollars for good luck. The question was whether she could navigate the complicated reality of making it work. The power dynamics, the class differences, the whispers that would follow if a billionaire CEO started dating her janitor. The potential impact on Hannah if things went wrong. The scars they both carried from their past. It would be easier to walk away. Safer. But Celeste Davenport had spent 3 years playing it safe, building walls, protecting herself from vulnerability. And she was tired, so deeply tired, of being safe and alone. Over the next few weeks, Celeste and Ryan continued their careful dance. They maintained professionalism during work hours, but their morning coffee conversations deepened, ranging from the trivial to the profound. Ryan introduced her to works of philosophy she'd never encountered, and she found herself reading Kierkegaard and Camus on her lunch breaks, eager to discuss them with him the next morning. They started taking walks on the beach after his shifts ended, talking for hours while Hannah was with her grandparents or at after-school activities. They discussed everything: his childhood, her father, the mechanics of running a hotel, the nature of grief, what they wanted from life. I never wanted to be wealthy, Celeste admitted one evening as they watched the sunset. I wanted to be an artist. Stupid, right? The billionaire's daughter who wanted to paint. Why is that stupid? Because it's impractical, frivolous. My father said. She stopped. What did your father say? That art was a nice hobby for rich women with too much time on their hands, but not a serious career. That I had responsibilities, a legacy to uphold. She picked up a shell, turned it over in her hands. I haven't painted in 6 years. That's a tragedy, Ryan said quietly. It's reality. Those aren't mutually exclusive. He was looking at her intently. Celeste, when was the last time you did something just because you wanted to? Not because it was good for business or expected of you, or what your father would have wanted. She couldn't answer. There was no answer. Come with me tomorrow, Ryan said impulsively. I'm taking Hannah to the park and then we're stopping by the garage where I work on the Harley sometimes. The owner lets me use his space in exchange for helping with his bikes. Just come spend a Sunday with us. No business, no expectations, just existing. It was terrifying. It was perfect. Okay, she said. Yes, I'd like that. Sunday arrived bright and clear. Celeste dressed in jeans and a t-shirt, feeling strange without her armor of designer clothes and makeup. She met Ryan and Hannah at a park near the beach, and immediately was dragged into an elaborate game that seemed to involve being a scientist studying alien specimens, which were actually pine cones, while Hannah acted as the research assistant with increasingly complicated questions. It was ridiculous, it was wonderful. After the park, they grabbed lunch at a small Cuban restaurant where Ryan was clearly a regular. The owner greeted him by name and slipped Hannah extra flan when she thought no one was looking. Then they headed to the garage, a somewhat ramshackle building that smelled of motor oil and possibility. The blue Harley was there, parked in its usual spot, and Celeste felt a rush of nostalgia so strong it nearly knocked her over. This motorcycle, older, more battle-scarred, but unmistakably the same one Ryan had been rebuilding when they were kids. You really kept it, she said softly. Told you. Some things you don't give up on. He was looking at her, not the bike, and the weight of his gaze made her pulse quicken. Hannah, oblivious to the moment, was already pulling on miniature work gloves. Dad's teaching me about engines. Want to help? So Celeste spent the afternoon learning about compression ratios and timing chains, getting her hands dirty for the first time in years, listening to Ryan explain mechanical principles with the same enthusiasm he'd had at 16. Hannah asked a million questions, and Ryan answered each one with patience and obvious joy. This, Celeste thought, this was what happiness looked like. Not board meetings or profit margins or the view from a penthouse. This, grease under her fingernails, a little girl's laughter, the warmth of Ryan's shoulder brushing against hers as they worked side by side. As the afternoon faded into evening and they cleaned up, Hannah announced she was tired and promptly fell asleep in the corner, using Ryan's jacket as a pillow. She does that, Ryan said fondly. Goes full throttle until she crashes. Celeste looked at the sleeping child, at the man watching her with such tenderness, at the motorcycle that had somehow survived a decade and represented so much more than metal and wheels. Ryan, she said quietly, I'm falling for you. Again? Or maybe I never stopped. I don't know. But I need you to know that today, this is what I want. Not the hotel or the money or any of it. This. He was quiet for a long moment, then, I'm terrified. Me too. If we do this and it doesn't work out, if I let Hannah get attached to you and then you leave, I won't leave, Celeste said firmly. Not unless you want me to. I spent 10 years believing you left me. I'm not going to do that to you or to her or to myself. The complications, we'll figure them out. Together. She stepped closer to him. I don't need easy, Ryan. I need real. And this, us, feels more real than anything in my life has felt in years. He reached out, cupped her face in his hands that were strong from work, gentle in their touch, still bearing faint traces of grease despite washing. You're sure? He asked. I've never been more sure of anything. And there, in a garage that smelled of motor oil and echoed with years of repairs and restorations, Ryan Walker kissed Celeste Davenport for the first time in 10 years. It was nothing like their fumbling teenage kisses. This was deeper, weighted with loss and hope and the knowledge of how rare it was to find someone who saw you, truly saw you, and loved you anyway. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Ryan rested his forehead against hers. We're really doing this? He asked. We're really doing this. Hannah stirred in the corner, mumbling something about quantum mechanics in her sleep, and they both laughed quietly. Welcome to my life, Ryan said. It's messy and complicated, and probably not what you imagined for yourself. It's perfect, Celeste replied. And for the record, the bracelet you've worn for 10 years? I fell in love with you all over again the first time I saw it. He smiled, that rare, genuine smile that transformed his whole face, and kissed her again. The future was uncertain. There would be challenges, public opinion, workplace complications, the simple difficulty of blending their very different worlds. But standing there in that garage with the sleeping child and a blue motorcycle, and a decade of misunderstanding finally cleared away, Celeste felt something she hadn't felt since she was 14 years old. Hope. Pure, uncomplicated hope. And for now, that was enough. 3 months later, Celeste stood in her office reviewing quarterly reports when her phone buzzed with a text from Ryan. "Emergency. Can you come to the garage?" Her heart jumped into her throat. Hannah. Something had happened to Hannah. She grabbed her keys and ran, not bothering with the elevator, taking the stairs down 37 floors in her heels, not caring about the stares from employees as she sprinted through the lobby to her car. The garage was 20 minutes away. She made it in 12. Ryan was standing outside, and the relief that flooded through her when she saw he was unharmed nearly buckled her knees. Then she saw his face. Not panicked, but strange. Uncertain. "What's wrong? Is Hannah okay?" "Hannah's fine. She's with her grandparents." He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture she'd come to recognize. "I'm sorry I scared you, but I needed you to come here. There's something you need to see." He led her inside to where the blue Harley sat, but it wasn't alone anymore. Next to it sat another motorcycle, clearly vintage, clearly valuable, and covered in a fine layer of dust that suggested it had been in storage for years. "I don't understand," Celeste said. Ryan pulled a folded paper from his pocket. His hands shook slightly as he handed it to her. "This came in the mail today, from a law firm in Atlanta. Apparently my mother had it in storage all these years, and when she moved into assisted living last month, she finally told me about it." Celeste unfolded the paper. It was a letter, dated 10 years ago in handwriting she recognized immediately. Her father's handwriting. "Ryan, if you're reading this, then I'm dead, and perhaps enough time has passed that the truth matters more than my pride. I need you to know that everything I told you that day in the parking lot was a lie, designed to drive you away from my daughter. You never took money from me. The bank records I showed Celeste were fabricated. I threatened your mother with false fraud charges because I was desperate and afraid. Afraid that my 14-year-old daughter had found something real with a 16-year-old boy who looked at her like she hung the moon. Afraid that you would take her away from me, from the life I'd planned for her. I was wrong. I've watched Celeste over the past years. Watched her marry a man I approved of, a man who turned out to love her money more than her soul. Watched her build walls around herself so high that nobody can reach her anymore. Watched her become successful and miserable in equal measure. I drove away the one person who ever loved her for herself. And I can't fix it while I'm alive because my pride won't let me admit what I did. But if you're reading this, then pride no longer matters. The motorcycle in storage with this letter belonged to me when I was young, before Celeste was born, before I built my empire. I rode it along the same beaches where you and my daughter used to walk. I was you once, Ryan, a young man who loved motorcycles and dreamed of freedom. Then I forgot what mattered. I'm leaving you this bike because you never forgot. You kept your Harley running through poverty and hardship. You kept Celeste's bracelet on your wrist for a decade. You're the man I should have been. The man I hope you still are when you read this. If there's any chance that you and Celeste can find each other again, take it. Tell her I'm sorry. Tell her I was wrong. Tell her that love matters more than money, connection more than status, and that the biggest regret of my life was driving away the boy who made her laugh. The bike is yours. And if you'll forgive a dead man's presumption, my daughter's heart should be yours too if you still want it." Marcus Davenport Celeste read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. Her father, her proud, stubborn, controlling father, had known, had regretted, had tried, in his own way, to make amends. "He wrote this before he died," she whispered. "He knew he was wrong and he couldn't tell me while he was alive." Ryan pulled her into his arms and she sobbed against his chest. For her father, for the years they'd lost, for the pain they'd both endured based on lies. "He loved you," Ryan said quietly. "In his own broken way, he loved you. He just didn't know how to let you go." I'm so angry at him, Celeste choked out. But I miss him so much. You can be both. Grief isn't simple. They stood there for a long time, holding each other in the dim garage, surrounded by motorcycles, the old Harley that represented Ryan's persistence, the vintage bike that represented her father's regret and redemption. Finally, Celeste pulled back, wiping her eyes. What are you going to do with it? Your mother kept it all these years? She knew about the letter. My mother was saving it until she thought I was ready to hear it, until she knew I'd moved back to Miami and might have a chance of finding you again. Ryan smiled sadly. She's more of a romantic than I gave her credit for. Are you? Celeste asked. Ready to hear it? He cupped her face gently. I think I've been ready since the day I saw you again in that hotel corridor. I just didn't know how to bridge 10 years and all that pain. But your father, he built us a bridge. A strange one, made of guilt and regret and vintage motorcycles, but a bridge nonetheless. Celeste laughed through her tears. That sounds like something he'd do. Grand gestures and emotional avoidance until the very end. Did any of you have an important object? Comment here. The question is, Ryan said seriously, what do we do now? We've been taking things slow, being careful, but this letter, it changes things, doesn't it? How? Because now we know the truth. All of it. No more secrets. No more lies. No more wondering if we're betraying your father's memory by being together. He gave us his blessing, even if it came from beyond the grave. Celeste looked at the two motorcycles, symbols of past and present, of mistakes and second chances. She thought about her father's words. Love matters more than money, connection more than status. I love you, she said simply. I loved you when I was 14 and I love you now. I don't want to go slow anymore. I don't want to be careful. I want to be brave enough to choose what my father couldn't. Love over fear. Ryan's smile was brilliant, transforming his entire face. I love you too. I have loved you for 10 years, even when I thought I'd never see you again. Even when loving you hurt too much to acknowledge. He kissed her then, deep and sure, a promise and a beginning. When they finally broke apart, Celeste looked at the vintage motorcycle her father had left. We should restore it. Together. You and me and Hannah. A family project. A family, Ryan repeated softly. I like the sound of that. Me too. Celeste leaned her head against his shoulder. My father was wrong about a lot of things, but he was right about one thing. You never forgot what mattered. And neither did I, not really. I just needed to find my way back to it. 6 months later, Celeste Davenport stood on a beach at sunset, wearing a simple white dress holding a bouquet of wildflowers. Hannah stood beside her in a yellow dress, grinning widely and holding the rings. Ryan waited at the makeshift altar, wearing a suit but with his old leather bracelet still visible on his wrist. The bracelet Celeste had made him 14 years ago, worn and re-knotted but never removed. Behind them, 2 blue Harley-Davidson motorcycles were parked side by side. Ryan's restored original and her father's vintage bike that they'd spent months bringing back to life together. Every bolt and gasket a meditation on forgiveness and second chances. It wasn't a huge wedding, just close friends, Hannah's grandparents, Ryan's mother who'd traveled from Georgia, and a few key employees from the hotel who'd become genuinely fond of their boss and her janitor-turned-fiancé. As Celeste walked toward Ryan, she thought about her father, about the letter that had changed everything, about the fact that sometimes love required letting go, and sometimes it required holding on, and the wisdom was knowing which was which. Hello, my friend, Ryan said softly as she reached him, echoing the words he'd spoken months ago in that hotel break room. How was your day today? Is everything okay? Celeste smiled through happy tears. Everything is perfect. And it was. Not because their lives were without complications. Celeste still ran a demanding business. Ryan still worked hard to support his family. Hannah still asked impossible questions and had nightmares about her mother. But they faced it together now, as a family built not on lies and control, but on truth and choice and the stubborn refusal to give up on love. As they exchanged vows with the ocean as witness, and the sunset painting the sky in impossible colors, Celeste felt her father's presence, not haunting but blessing. He'd made terrible mistakes, but In the end, he'd tried to make them right, and that, she'd learned, was all any of them could do. Acknowledge our failures, try to repair what we've broken, and trust that love is strong enough to bridge the gaps. The bracelet on Ryan's wrist caught the fading light, blue and white ocean colors, a promise kept across years and separation and pain. Some things, Celeste thought as Ryan kissed her, and Hannah cheered and the waves applauded against the shore, were worth holding on to, worth fighting for, worth believing in even when the world said to let go. Love was one of those things, and she would never ever forget that again.